Ready.
We'll call the meeting of the Planning Commission to order this November 1st, 2023. Welcome, everybody. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Ryan Pearson,
Here.
Paul Wagaman,
Present.
Philip Combs, absent at this time. Lynn Larson.
Here.
Sims,
Here.
Robert Estrada. Here. And Don Daniels.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you so much. I'm looking for a motion for the minutes, and I don't have the date of those minutes.
October 4th.
Okay, October.
So moved.
We have Mr. Larson made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Wagaman made a second. Any changes, comments? Hearing or seeing none? All those in favor by saying aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, the minutes passed as written. Thank you for October 4th, 2023. Any changes to our agenda tonight?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I was going to suggest that we just switch the order of the presentations.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'll open up public comment period. Seeing no one in our audience tonight, but do we have anyone online wishing to speak about any subject?
No, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no one online as well, we'll close the public comment. We do not have a public hearing. We do not have unfinished business, so we move right to new business. And we go on the update regarding the public engagement for 2024 periodic review and Tillicum Woodbrook sub-area plan update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So good evening. It's been a month. It's nice to have you all back here this evening. We are just doing a quick update for you just to let you know where we're at with the public engagement efforts related to the 2024 periodic review. So under state law, there's actually now explicit language that says you have to have early and continuous public notification and participation. And you want to ensure that there are multiple choices, multiple ways for the public to be able to engage in your comprehensive planning process. So where we are at right now with Lakewood is we have our two different online locations or destinations. First is our city's website page regarding the 24 periodic review. And the other is lakewoodwaspeaks.org. And that actually is an opportunity where people can submit public comment just directly through the website. And once we get into our public hearing process, that will be considered formal public comment when they do that. We do have an electronic update that's now going out every month or so. Right now we're at 37 subscribers, but that is starting to tick up faster. So that'll build over the next 6 months, I am assuming. We do have now a series and a history of the stakeholder committees that we've developed. So in the fall of 22, so about a year ago, there was a committee formed to deal with the housing element update under 1220. And that's the one that said you have to plan for a certain number of units per economic bracket, if you will. And then also one to look at the city's existing energy and climate change chapter. And that group met from fall of 22 through this last summer. You see the names of the people there, but you basically had utilities and nonprofit organizations. You had several residents, and you had the Master Builders Association represented on this group. And their recommendations are incorporated. You haven't seen them yet with draft documents, but they are incorporated into what will be coming to you next spring. In the summer and fall of this year, we have now two different steering committees in place. First is one for the full comprehensive plan periodic review. And then there's a second one that is focused exclusively on the Tillicum neighborhood plan update. We are in the middle of finishing who will be on which group, but as of now, we do have a tentative list. And so this is the one for the larger group that's going to be looking at the full proposals, all the different elements being updated. And again, you have a wide variety of people from the resident category, if you will, from utilities, from nonprofits, from community organizations and neighborhood associations, the health department, and businesses. So we tried to make an effort to reach out to people with a wide variety of backgrounds and areas of interest.
Assume, yes, Mr. Estrada.
I've got a question on the original committee. We had two utilities, Representative PSC and the light, not Tacoma, and the second one.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I see. So we do have all three.
Yeah.
I stand corrected.
Yeah,
Sorry
yep.
about that.
No worries at all. No worries. And then in terms of the Tillicum neighborhood plan, that is getting renamed, just so everyone's aware, to Tillicum Woodbrook Sub-Area Plan. And that also includes a variety. It's a smaller group. It's a smaller area of review that they need to do. But again, we have residents, we have the community center represented, we have the neighborhood association, business, and then we're hoping to have someone from communities and schools as well. This will be kind of the core group for both of those steering committees, but anyone who wants to be tracking this and providing comment and feedback throughout the process are welcome to do so. So up until this point, actually up through today, we've had 4 different focus groups and 2 pop-up events in the city. Springbrook Connections, the Affordable Housing Consortium, Lakewood Lions, and the Lakewood Community Collaboration have all hosted either consultants that are working on this with us or staff talking about the 24 review. And then at Clover Park and also the Lakewood Youth Summit, there were people there gathering information and feedback from attendees. There's been 1 joint meeting of the 2 steering committees just to kick everything off. That happened about a month ago. And then today actually was the meeting that was the first one exclusively to the Tillicum Woodbrook plan. And so we got some good initial feedback from them. It was a review of the existing conditions in the Tillicum Woodbrook area, and they were providing continued recommendations about where they wanted to see the updates in that plan occur. So in terms of graphic outlay for the schedule, we are right today at November 1st. But as you see, there's been things happening so far. As I just mentioned, one of the steering committees happened today. 2 weeks from tonight, right before this meeting, will be that open house that we're having in this room. You're welcome to come if you want to, no obligation though. We will be doing a high-level public description and discussion about housing in particular, because that's where the largest amount of changes are happening for residents in the city. But we will be also ready to answer questions about any of the other areas that are being updated as in the process. And then between 2 weeks from now and into next spring, there will be continued meetings of both of those steering committees I mentioned. There will also be a development of a supplemental and environmental impact statement of the comprehensive plan, part of which will be related to what we're going to talk about next. And then we're also going to have by May 1st in front of you, the draft comprehensive plan policies, the draft regulations that go with them, and also this new draft Tillicum Woodbrook sub-area plan. So by next May, the sausage making in the background will be done and it'll become public. And so it'll be a series of discussions and either one public hearing or more, up to you when we get there. And then it's scheduled at this point to head over to council starting in June.
Great.
And then by the end of next year, that is the state deadline for when we need to have our completed package done and approved by Puget Sound Regional Council. The Department of Commerce is going to take a look at it as well. And then the city council needing to take final action if there's anything that comes back from those 2 state agencies. So if there's any questions,
Any
I'm
questions?
happy to answer them. But otherwise, that's where we sit.
Great. The chair does want to recognize Mr. Combs is in attendance tonight, so I just wanted to make a note of that. Welcome. No questions. Wow. Oh, yeah, Mr. Wegeman.
It's about 10 years ago, they had a big plan for Tillicum area.
Mhm.
Is that are they gonna build on that, or is that gonna be totally scrapped and do something else?
No, that's what this is based on, is they're starting from that 2011 plan, taking a look at what has been done so far, what's still not done, and where things have changed.
Because there was some nice ideas in
Mhm.
some of that back then. And so this is just trying to refresh that and move forward.
Yeah, and there's a lot that needs to change because so much has happened since 2011. But yeah, that is the base document.
Okay.
Great. Yes, Mr. Larson.
I don't think it matters, but I should state that I'm a member of the Master Builders Association. I'm on the board of directors there. Any views I espouse will be my own, but I should state that.
Great, thank you. All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the next on our agenda tonight is the Planning Commission discussion regarding the city parking policy and regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So joining me to help with this discussion this evening, we have here in the room with us Community Development Director Dave Buer, but we also have online our Public Works Engineering Director, Paul Busich. So I will start with this presentation, but the intent here is to have a good dialogue with all groups and all people involved. So please, you can stop me by all means as I walk through some of this stuff, but that's the point of the rest of the meeting, is a conversation about this issue. So, to go back to the beginning, over a year ago now, we started talking about the 24 periodic review. And again, as has been discussed many times here at the Planning Commission, a lot of the focus has been on changes to housing rules and requirements, including not only what was required under the Growth Management Act before 2021, but now you have to plan for all these different economic levels. And now with action that was taken this spring by our state legislature, there is now a requirement that the city plan for multiple units on a lot, whether they be defined as an accessory dwelling unit or whether they be one of those 9 types of identified missing middle housing units, right? So that has begged the question at an internal level among staff at this point to say, okay, if we assume people will start to build these types of denser residential areas, what is that going to do to roads and what is that going to do with parking? And in particular, because as we'll talk about, we have already at least once, but we'll go over it again tonight. There are actually restrictions on the type of parking regulations that the city is allowed to put in place for the middle housing and the ADUs as well. So right now, we do have 3 different areas of our municipal code dealing with parking. Citywide, it is our chapter 18A80, but then each of the downtown and the Station District subareas have their own chapter for parking as well. And if you recall, citywide, you have a more traditional zoning and development regulation system. Within the 2 sub areas, it's a hybrid form-based code. And so depending on the type of street that a building or a use is located on, there's different frontage requirements, different street designs. So it's a slightly different flavor in those 2 sub areas, but there are those 3 places right now where parking is specifically regulated. The city right now does not allow, and it's gonna go back and forth, it gets confusing, but I'm gonna say on-street off-site or off-street on-site, yeah, okay. They are the same thing. On-street, off-site is the same. You get it. Okay. But right now, Lakewood does not allow parking off-site on the street. In, see if I can get, in the legislation that I mentioned earlier this spring, 1110 and then 1337, there is requirements for additional housing in what are essentially Lakewood's R1 through R4 areas. The other higher density residential zones won't be affected by these bills. It is really just those R1, 2, 3, and 4. All of those requirements are actually due to be put in place by Lakewood by mid-2025. However, the city is incorporating it into the 24 review because it makes little to no sense to get through that enormous process and 6 months later try to talk about this and open it all back up again. So here is a breakdown, as simple as at least I could get it to be, of what are required in various zones, whether it's middle housing or whether it's accessory dwelling units. In the R1 through R4 zones, that again is where middle housing would be required. If you are just looking at it generally speaking, it's now 2 units per lot. If you are within, however, 1/4 mile of a major transit stop, that goes up to 4 units per lot. And then whether or not you're near that 1/4 mile of a transit stop, if at least one of the units is going to be affordable, meaning below market rate, you can go up to 4. And then you are back down to 2, however, if you're in an area where there is no sewer service. In terms of accessory dwelling units, that is 2 accessory dwelling units in addition to the principal residence. So these overlap. It is confusing. I'll be the first one to agree with you. Yes, an accessory dwelling unit can be considered one of the middle housing types, but they are 2 separate bills and they do have slightly different treatment of parking, and we'll get into that in just a second. The middle housing definitions, 2 or more attached, stacked, or clustered homes, which include duplexes all the way up to sixplexes, townhouses, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. And again, this is something that in Lakewood is being required to allow on all lots greater than 1,000 square feet. And again, that's going to be the R1 through R4 zones.
Mr. Pearson.
So does the definition, does it require that these that they can be all attached units? Or is there any way that, we could require them to be detached at all? Or is it, I guess that's my question. Does it have is there any flexibility on if we allow them to be attached or detached?
When you're talking about accessory dwelling units down here on the bottom, the bill explicitly says it could be 2 attached, it could be 1 attached and 1 detached, or it could be 2 detached, and it can also be the conversion of an existing structure. When you're talking middle housing, there are all these different varieties, and I am not aware of a way to have triplexes up to sixplexes or townhouses not be attached product.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more so just the ADUs. It says
Yeah.
they may be attached or detached and
Meaning that the city can't say you can't have.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Buer.
If you wish to impose administrative architectural review design standards for all housing in Lakewood, that might be a method to address your question. Possibly, but not completely.
Thank you.
Mr. Larson.
How are we planning for accommodation by utility line sizes and availability of water for these additional dwelling units?
It's a matter of the city because it doesn't own its own utilities, working with utilities to identify where there is a concern for capacity. And if it's at the point where the city does not think within the 20-year planning horizon, these number of units can be allowed, we go back to the Department of Commerce and explain that to them. And provided there's enough justification, they can give the city an extension of time.
Okay.
But I would also point out, if you're going to go up and you have all your utility lines above ground, at some point, we're going to run into conflicts.
Mhm.
So related specifically to parking for the middle housing units, the city is not allowed to require off-street or on-site parking within 1/2 mile distance. So you're putting up a duplex or a townhomes on a place that's originally was in a single family area. If you are within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop, you cannot require additional parking. You can't require more than 1 space per unit on lots smaller than 6,000 square feet. You cannot require more than 2 spaces on lots greater than 6,000 square feet, and that's anywhere in the areas where all of this would apply. Under the accessory dwelling unit information, again, this can be either attached or detached from the principal unit. There has to be at least 2 ADUs allowed on all lots within the minimum lot sizes for the single family zone. The number of units can be limited to 2 in addition to the principal unit, so a total of 3 on lots that are less than 2,000 square feet. Here's the parking for ADUs. The city may not require public street improvements for permitting ADUs, may not require off-street or on-site parking within 1/2 mile of the major transit stop. And then again, that 1 for under 6,000 square feet or 2 in a greater than 6,000 square foot lot.
Yes, Mr. Estrada.
How are we going to address the density issue? Structure cannot exceed a certain percentage of the lot as such. And with the addition of the ADUs, it's going to exceed, I assume.
What the city has to do in addition to changing these rules is look at all of its site development requirements, because the city is not allowed to prevent this from happening through its regulations. So there's going to need to be some significant changes in the code as well.
Yeah, Mr. Larson.
At what interval will we be revisiting these to see that they actually work or don't or need to be modified?
It's up to the city how often you want to look at it. It can be annual. The state requires that there will be a 5-year check-in. So we're doing these big reviews every 10 years. At the 5-year point, we have to be reporting back to the Department of Commerce how it's going, essentially.
Would it be appropriate, Mr. Chairman, to have that go on the planning commission agenda for review once a year or every
You can
18
make that
months or
recommendation to the
some
staff.
reasonable period?
Mr. Buer has a comment.
Before we start talking about
Yeah.
that, let's have Tiffany complete her
Okay.
evaluation because there's more to come.
She
Oh.
paused.
And it's more complex.
Right on, okay.
The other piece I would point out too on the parking, the city cannot require more parking, but that doesn't mean the developer, if the developer wants to provide more parking,
Mhm.
they can.
Mr. Pearson,
So, this isn't exactly on parking, but it's on parking, but, so, new developments that, like my subdivision, you can't have ADUs as part of the CCNRs. So now the new CCNRs, probably you can't have that language in there, I assume.
Any new covenants and restrictions have to comply with these two
Yeah.
state statutes. And it is speculated that the legislature is actually going to consider this next coming session to say even the older ones that predate this no longer hold.
Okay, so do you think there would be any way to like have developments have smaller lot sizes and require like a combined open space to, allow for a more normal feeling subdivision?
The way this bill is written tries to avoid that happening. It is written to say,
Figured I just.
yeah, it's written to say that covenants and restrictions shall not prevent blah, 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 blah.
Okay, thank you.
okay, Mr. Buer.
We have run into situations in the past where certain covenants are actually recorded on the face of the plat when they're approved.
Mhm.
Now, that's been previous to these rules and regulations. So we do have plats where those rules are in place. I don't know how that's going to be addressed in the future, but that's a question.
Okay, Miss Tiffany, go ahead.
Thank you. So what you see here is a map you've seen before, but to remind you, in this map, you see in goldenrod or that bright yellow, the areas where you are outside of the quarter-mile transit, a major transit spot. And you also are seeing the bright pink critical area, and then the blue hatched marks are wetlands. So inside this weird-looking U shape with the orange lots, those are the residential areas within a quarter-mile of transit. So they are where you have the higher number of units per lot and also the further restrictions on parking. So what this is saying, and this is only middle housing, this doesn't include the ADU stuff, but what this is showing you is that around, I don't know what you would call this, kind of the more urban, the more businessy part of the city, you're going to have higher densities and less parking allowed to be required. And then on the west side of the city where you have some of the longer standing residential areas, many of the neighborhoods will maybe only be partially affected because of the presence of a lake or its buffer or wetlands. When you look at this map, however, this is a little more detailed. This is a second or third look at this data from the city's perspective. This also shows where 1110, but also now at 1337, the ADU bill would apply. The bright pink is still the critical area. The green now that you see around some of these areas, that's the tree canopy, in particular oak trees. And you also see in bright red a number of streets. And this is one of the reasons we're talking parking tonight as well, is because in some of these areas, and this blue is where it is assumed right now the city will be most and fastest affected by more units per lot, because these are the areas without the critical area limits, and they are in the right part of the city to have more units per lot. It's in the R1 through R4 zone. The red lines are rights of way that are less than 60 feet in width. And under the city's current standard plans, and Mr. Busius might want to jump in here a little bit later to clarify if I say this wrong, But essentially, for residential, you need either 50 or 60 feet width minimum to allow curb, gutter, sidewalk, utilities, and that minimum does not include on-street parking.
Hmm.
So these areas they're obviously built out, and they have these narrower than 60 feet rights of way, some of which have been encroached on by private development over time. And these are areas where it is assumed, I think by anybody looking at this, that there's going to be increased pressure not only on the street system, but on the desire for parking on the street with these new units.
Hmm.
So we're seeing a potential problem facing us down the railroad tracks. Just a quick reminder, we're talking about 9,400 new units coming between now and 2044. So as we're looking where they may go, this is where additional units may go regardless of those full numbers, but that's again, maybe where people will want to build faster because they're able to do it on the same piece of land rather than having to build or redevelop properties. So the street design and parking locations, again, I just mentioned 50 or 60 feet, depending on where utilities are. And the road design does not include on-street / off-site parking. These are the discussion questions that I just had in my brain after putting all of this together, but please don't feel constrained to any of this. But essentially, city staff is looking at, this is coming, we have to do it per state law. But we also have the status quo in Lakewood incorporated after getting built out, older streets, older neighborhoods, limited ability to just go in there and build new road systems with on-street parking assumed. And at the same time, there are also grants and road projects that Public Works Engineering are already working on or starting to plan for, where at this point, they're not assuming on-street parking either. So these questions are trying to start to touch this, and potentially the commission may want to send some thoughts or recommendations up to city council. I know they have expressed interest in hearing what you have to say about this topic. So the questions, I'll just go over them briefly. Should on-street parking be allowed? Because right now it's not at all. If not, where do we try to assume planning for parking to go as opposed to on-street? If you do think it's a good idea to allow on-street parking into the nebulous future in residential areas, mixed use, commercial, or somewhere else, should that on-street parking be publicly or privately owned and maintained? Because that's a whole nother question. And then how do you fund construction of on-street, maintenance of on-street, and enforcement of on-street parking? So all of these questions kind of start to roil around. But again, please don't feel constrained by this. Those are my initial thoughts to maybe spur discussion. But what I would like to do now is just invite Mr. Busich if he would like to say anything, or if he's just here to listen and react to questions.
Thank you, Tiffany. Let me get my
Welcome,
camera
Paul.
set up here.
Go ahead and speak if you have any comments.
I just want to say that Tiffany's done a great
You're
job.
muted.
I'm not muted on my side. Can you hear me?
That's very strange.
Still-
You try to unmute once more.
Did that work?
Nope. Still
Can
nothing.
you hear me now?
I'm pretty good at reading lips, but really
Can't hear you.
can't hear you.
Are you able to call in?
Yes.
Okay, he'll
He'll
call
call.
us. So
Okay.
while you're doing that,
Yeah.
Paul, we're going to ask Dave Buer if there's anything he'd like to add.
Yes.
I have a lot to add, but I'll just start with one thing, which is you can see how complex this is going to be. And the ability for us to explain this to the general public is a real concern. These rules and regulations, when you start trying to apply them in code, is going to come across as confusing, and the public is going to get extremely frustrated.
Mhm.
Okay, so I have a customer client service problem with what we're doing here. We are not helping things. You're going to have an expert help you, walk you through this so that you're going to be able to do it, because staff is not going to have the time. That's one thing. The other thing that's a big push is the way in which public dollars are used in Lakewood for road construction. Paul basically goes out and applies for grants. And the grants have limitations. They're for collectors or major streets, think arterials, things like that. If you're looking for funds to build on-street parking in a residential neighborhood, my first response is it's not there. And I give you an example. I live on a 60-foot wide strip, a right-of-way. It's only paved 40 feet. So 10 feet on either side is unused. It has curb, but no sidewalk. So when people park on both sides of the street currently, there's only one lane of traffic. And we've had discussions, if we're going to increase density, such as what is proposed, at some point, we're going to have to start addressing conflicts with parking in residential neighborhoods. It's possible that the city will begin getting into the whole issue of issuing parking permits. Then we start talking, I'm just going to bring it up. Short-term rentals. That's a whole nother issue. Where do they park when you have constrained situations? This is one of the things that we requested when we go through the EIS, the supplemental EIS, but that we take a look at these impacts so that we can demonstrate to the state that we have some unique circumstances here that make application of these rules and regulations difficult at best and significantly affect the quality of life for existing neighborhoods.
Paul, are you able to speak through the phone?
I can. Can you hear me now? Hang on a second here. Can you hear me now? I'm talking on my phone.
Yeah, he's still on mute over here.
Looks like he's trying to talk.
I'm
Do we not
sorry.
have sound like?
Yeah, when he calls in,
Here.
you'll see.
Oh, we're not muted.
No.
My phone is
Paul,
telling
can
me
you
that
hear
I'm
us?
not muted. Yes, yes, yes.
Can't hear you still. There you
Making
are.
noise, but like the volume.
He can hear us.
You can hear us, but we still can't. Over here to the far right, it's that
So I'm
screen. Tiffany.
Can you hear me as I talk through the phone? It says that I'm muted, but I don't know how to unmute it. No,
I'm
that's
just not
the
sure why it's not
computer.
working.
All right, let's try this. Can you hear me at all?
Okay, I'm gonna try, let's keep going.
Okay,
Big-
no
on
problem.
you, Paul,
So-
I'm gonna call you.
Yeah.
We'll do it that way.
On in here?
Does look like sound's coming through for him.
Yeah. Is the speaker in the room on?
As far as I can tell,
Okay.
we're not on mute. He can hear us, right? Paul, you can hear us?
Yep. Oh, and he can't hear you now?
Test talking into that microphone.
Yeah, no, these are working. Yeah.
While we're waiting on this, just one other piece. Tiffany showed you the location of streets that are less than 60 feet right of way. We have another map which shows private streets.
Yeah.
So the two of those might combine, they may not, but that is another limitation on the ability to increase density.
Mr. Bjork, in the future coming up, can maybe staff show us some examples of on-street parking, what possibilities look like? I have seen them and, but I would like to see some options that might come across.
Yeah, I would tell you that if you want to see what it could look like, drive through Lakewood in certain parts of neighborhoods at 6 a.m. before people go to work.
Yeah.
And I do that because I'm weird.
Yeah.
But I can certainly take some photographs
Just-
and share that with the commission.
So the other concern then is, which I've noticed, a lot of these residents currently, there is no on-street parking. For example, Hipkins, some is curb, sidewalks, then no curb and no sidewalk. So they're using their front yard to have, 10 to 15 front yard of grass. It's mud now this time of the year, but they got 10 to 15 cars on the front yard, barely get out of their front door to hop into the car out on the So those are concerns now too. People will be using them as parking lots and filling it full of gravel and,
You're gonna see people start, at some point, creating spaces so that people can rent a parking space.
yeah.
The other thing you're going to see are people repairing vehicles on the street.
Mhm.
So that's another issue that increases the level of enforcement in this community.
Yep.
If you're-
Okay, is Paul available?
We have him on my phone on speaker.
Okay, Paul. Yeah, we, pretty good.
Okay, I'm gonna monkey around with my volume here so I can hear you. Turn off the volume on my laptop so you don't have to hear it reverberate back. Is that working okay for you?
Yeah, a little bit. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. It's been so long trying to figure out the mechanics here with the phone and the laptop. I kind of forgot what you were asking me or what I wanted to say. So let me just say that both Dave and Tiffany have done an outstanding job articulating the issues for us on the roads. Those areas where we are already going out there to build projects, and we have a number of those, we're not providing on-street parking. So for me, this is a worry in the future. Are we going to need to provide that on-street parking? And do we need to incorporate that into our grant applications to the state, feds, and others? And will they fund it? I don't know. The number of roadways that are less than 60 feet wide concern me. Not because I have projects slated for them right now, but because in the future, the vision for the city is to have sidewalks accessible to our community members throughout the community. If some of those rights of ways are 40 or 50 feet in width, and people are eventually using those areas for even more on street, let me rephrase that, within right of way parking, then that's going to put a bit of a kink in our ability to go out there and build the curb gutter and sidewalks within the limited right of way and not impact a lot of people. Our projects already, like if you've driven down Veterans Drive and soon to be completed Washington Boulevard, you will remember that where people parked was haphazard. Anywhere off the pavement was viewed as their parking area. Some of the complaints we got from people, very few, was, well, now where am I going to park my car or my Suburban or my trailer or my boat? And we were able to show them how they still had room on their property to do that, but those roads are wider. And so even back behind the walk, they still had some limited ability to take advantage of that. On those narrower rights of way, there is not that advantage at all. So concern is in the future, how widespread this is going to be, how many people are going to want to park within the right of way, and what that does to our ability to actually build the road sections that we have historically been able to build.
Yep.
Were there any questions beyond what you heard so far?
Mr. Buer does have a comment.
A good example of how this goes bad is in the Tillicum neighborhood, where you have very narrow streets. And many years ago, the county used a HUD grant to put in curbs, gutters, and sidewalk, but the lots are so small. It's like 3,000 or less than 5,000 square feet. There's no parking. So people park on the sidewalks. So what good are having sidewalks if they're used for parking? And then on top of that, the police department's out there all the time issuing citations. So this is not resolved.
Any other questions for Paul? Mr. Estrada?
Here, there's a comment regarding private streets. Does the city have any kind of authorization regarding those streets?
Is from my perspective, they're private streets. They're pretty much off limits as part of these new regulations. It's really up to the HOA and the terms and conditions underlying the CC&Rs.
Okay, any other questions for Paul? I don't think so, Paul. Thank you so much for being here. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we got your comments and look forward to talking to you again. Any other questions for, yes, Mr. Larson?
It occurs to me that there may need to be a factor in the ADU world for the type of ownership of the ADU, whether it's a condominium or a wholly owned or rental as part of the same tax parcel, and that tax assessor would need to be thinking about additional workload for that whole process as well, because I don't see or hear about any restrictions in how the ADUs are particularly owned, or are there?
Okay, this gets into some really, in my perspective, some really hairball issues. Only because this department operates a rental housing inspection program. So let's say you, Mr. Larson, built an ADU in your backyard. And I got a divorce and I needed a place to live. And I came to you and said, can I rent this ADU? And you say, yes. And you think I'm a decent fellow, but really I'm not. And I fall behind in my rent and you want to get me out. So now you're subject to tenant landlord law.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get somebody out in your backyard. I don't think people understand the nuances of how difficult that can be when it comes to accessory dwelling units, unless you're a corporation. And you have attorneys and they manage large numbers of residences. And we have been monitoring this through the rental housing program. We have 240 corporate single-family homes and condominiums. So
That means inspections and qualifications in the, as rental housing.
as rental
as
housing,
well,
we are going to
on
have
a
to make
regular
an
basis.
amendment to our rental housing program to require inspections from ADUs. Yes. We haven't done that yet, but that's forthcoming.
But if person wanted to own it in the form of a condominium, you wanted to create it.
You'd
could
have
do
to create a condominium and go through that process.
that. Yes.
Yep. Okay, any other questions on this? Ms. Tiffany, do you have more to add?
I don't have more to add, and I'm happy to bring this back to you whenever you want to chew on it further, because again, the council would be interested in hearing your thoughts about how to proactively plan for this. We don't know how fast the stuff's going to get built, but eventually it is going to start to affect not only parking, but just driving on these established residential roads.
Before, go ahead, Mr. Larson.
I might suggest as well, in addition to the suggestion I made earlier about having this on our agenda, to maybe have a work party about it, so we can spread out, each one of us take a look at a certain part of the city and report back to have that available to the council too, because we're a pretty good informed workforce. We're out in the world every day here, so shouldn't be onerous on us to do that.
Make a recommendation to the staff if that's agreeable with all the other commissioners as well. Mr. Pearson, sorry, I had a comment, but I forgot it. So go ahead.
Would you mind bringing back up the question slide?
Sure.
With the different topics?
Okay, yeah, 1 second.
Touch on some
Yep.
of these.
Sorry.
Yeah, so, my opinion, should Lakewood allow on-street parking? The answer is yes. There's been, this is pretty common in most of our neighboring jurisdictions. I work for Pierce County and we're starting to go through the pains of dealing with on-street parking and what works and what doesn't work and why it doesn't work and things like that. I think it's great to allow for on-street parking. And as more of like an overflow, I don't think that developments should be including on-street parking into their parking densities. I'm against that. I think that they need to deal with it on site, and most of these parking requirements that we have, I feel, are on the lower end anyway, and so we end up with more cars around. So if we have a few extra spaces on the street, then hopefully that can accommodate for those folks. Where residential areas, mixed use, commercial, yes, yes, everywhere. Some examples of residential areas, I guess as it relates to the ADU and the middle housing, we can't require any sort of frontage improvements with those anyway, right?
With the ADUs, you can't. With the middle housing, it wasn't so clear in the bill, so we'll have to,
So you can't?
you
with
cannot
ADUs?
with
Yeah.
ADUs.
Okay. So, you know, if, I guess if you're getting middle housing, that's something to be discussed. You know, when we can require frontage improvements, but the other thing that comes along with frontage improvements that I'm dealing with in Pierce County is that we only have, you know, a very limited number of typical sections. And so, you know, those typical sections don't always work for every project. And so having a little wider spread of, you know, potential allowable sections to work with as, you know, approved by the Lakewood Public Works Department or something, you know, would go a long ways, I think. Limiting the on-street parking to areas that have, you know, less than 2,000 or 2,500 ADT, unless they're in like a super urban, you know, setting similar to UP, how they have over there where the Whole Foods, how they have that on, you know, that's a higher ADT road, but it's more of like a central district situation. We wouldn't want to have on-street parking on Bridgeport is my point. So, let's see. Could it be publicly, it could be both, I guess, you know, depending on if you have a new, development, a new, like a new subdivision, you know, if they wanted to have private roads and, you know, if those are our standards that you're required or allowed to do on-street parking on your local road, then they could, you know, have that as an option. Same thing if it was going to be a public road. I think the public roads, I have a pretty large, like 300 acre or 300 lot, subdivision out in Spanaway area, and we're trying to figure out the road section there, and the density is super high density. And so, you know, I think the lots like in some areas are like 30 or 40 feet wide. So just super high density. And we're trying to consider, I think it's a good idea, but to not provide specific on-street parking designated areas, yet rather just have a wider road section with rolled curbs and maybe some more robust sidewalks that are like, you know, say the sidewalks are 6 or 7 feet wide and like 6-inch concrete. So someone could potentially pull their tire up onto the edge to get out of the road a little bit and then have like a 28-foot wide or a 30-foot wide road. So you still have, you know, if someone parks a little bit up on each curb, you still have a fire lane to get through. That's I think a pretty good idea, but not something that Pierce County currently has in code. So,
Yeah.
some ideas like that though, you know, how can you accommodate pedestrians and vehicles when they're so close?
Sure.
You know, people don't want to scratch up their rims on curbs, so they're tending to park 12, 18 inches into the road. Well, if there was a rolled curb, maybe they park right on it and it saves, you know, 3 feet on each side. So type of thing. Funded, I think if Lakewood is doing a public project, a public road improvement, you know, the city should be held to the same standards that developers are. And we should be requesting and hopefully getting those on-street parking improvements into those projects as well. You know, as much as we can. Those are things that the city council would have to deal with a bit more. I don't think that the city should be doing anything. I don't think they can, going back into existing private roads and doing improvements there. Maintenance, you know, if it's in the right of way, it'd be publicly maintained. And then the code enforcement part, I'm not 100% sure on, but I like the idea of, you know, trying to accommodate for as much potential on-street parking as we can, and you know, letting people park where they can fit in. So another example I have is there's, I think it's called like the urban corridor in Pierce County, so it allows for a real high density. And so what's going on is developers are demoing these residential houses that were there, putting in triplexes, fourplexes, condos, some sort. But what you end up having is a whole bunch of driveway approaches onto the road, so you can't accommodate, you know, your typical on-street parking, you know, as it would be a pullout area. So I think allowing folks to just have a wider section of right-of-way, kind of like what I was talking about with like a 28 or a 30-foot wide road, which is way wider than you would typically have, but, and then, you know, let people try to squeeze in a parking spot in between driveways wherever they can, but at least, you know, there's more opportunity for some parking than not, so. But that's my biggest thing with the on-street parking, is to allow some flexibility for people to get a little bit creative and try not to be so rigid, so.
So I do have a question as well. So you talked about the subdivisions, and there's one right around the corner from me, 104th and Butte, subdivision going in. They just poured the curb and sidewalks. All that's great. That's the development, boop, it ends, sidewalk ends on both sides. I have a 3-foot drop on one side and the other side is the similar. So all that's great, but it's a sidewalk to nowhere.
Right.
So those are kind of the questions sometimes is, does it fit the, you know, I know those are the requirements, but does it really fit that area currently? And who knows when the sidewalk will continue. They'll probably put it on the other side and have one sidewalk on the other side. So
Yeah.
those are things that we see continuously, and sometimes people say that just doesn't make sense.
But if you don't start,
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So they get to walk. Okay, Mr. Parsons.
Obviously, we're not the only city dealing with it. It's gonna be a challenge for everybody. Have we, in talking with other cities, have they tried to punt on this a bit? Are they trying to move forward the same way? Do you have any background on that?
We're probably further along in this analysis than most of the cities in the Puget Sound. We've heard that from Commerce and from others as well. Just trying to look ahead in the crystal ball to see how this is gonna, you know, affect people on the ground. However, if you look at some jurisdictions, they maybe had larger right-of-ways from the beginning, and even if they don't allow on-street parking now, if they were to switch, it wouldn't be so much of the actual, do we have space to do it analysis? It's just, how do you maintain it? For Lakewood, it's a combination of both. But yeah, this is certainly not going to be a unique discussion. And over the next year, I think the noise will get louder and louder from all the local governments realizing what, and the thing, like within a quarter or a half mile of a major transit stop, and reminder for Lakewood, one of them isn't even going to be built till 2045. That's been identified for us. You have to plan this way, and you're not allowed to do on-street improvements, or you're not allowed to require parking because you're within a quarter or a half mile of a transit stop. So it hasn't really come up yet.
Yes, Mr. Buer.
I will let you know that should an applicant propose multifamily tax exemption, city would have the right to require more parking. That is currently before the city council. And on previous applications for multifamily projects in certain areas of the city, the council has required additional parking.
Mhm. Okay, any other discussion? Mr. Combs? Oh, Mr. Wegman.
You know, I come back and look at supply and demand. So if we looked at our city, we could look at a map and figure out how many potential parking spaces we have.
Well,
And
there's
so-
none on the street right now. You can just say that.
Well, I mean, okay. I mean, so if you, but let's say we have to have parking, so we got to start looking and say, okay, where can we put the cars?
Correct.
You know, and just like the fairgrounds does, they got to figure out where they're going to stick people.
Mhm.
So if we looked at our whole city and said, okay, what's the best we could do? And then we can say, okay, you know, how could we get there? What would we have to tell people? You know, the other thing I see out of this, if you only have so much capacity, that means somewhere along the line, you have to tell some people you're not going to park here. And so, you know, Mr. Bureau mentioned permits and some of those things, you know, those become very distasteful for people. But if you've looked at the thing and said, we've got this much capacity, how do we share that? I just know, for my church, you know, and we have an event at my house or something, and, you know, we could have 25 cars. So we basically, for that one event, clobber our whole street. And so people want to be able to do those kind of things. That socialization is a good thing. But, you know, I think, you know, Ryan made some good points. If you make it easy for people, because it's basically just short periods of time when they need it there. But where it gets bad is where some people start taking advantage. You know, they got a car that I don't even know if it can drive, is sitting there, it's taking a spot, and those kind of things. So that becomes more of an enforcement issue.
It already is.
And I know some people get pretty frustrated when they get it ticketed because they got a Hulk sitting in their front yard. That creates a lot of angst for some folks. So, but somehow we have to figure out what we're going to do. I guess I would like to see what we could do for as far as capacity, that we could maximize this whole thing. And then from there, you can go to our community and try to sell it to them that, hey, here's what we're thinking and why we're doing that.
Yep. Mr. Combs?
Yeah, we're not going to be able to change any of the state requirements. They're out there. Every city is dealing with this. I love the idea of just keeping our ear to the ground on what other people are coming up with for solutions. But I do think it's still prudent for us to continue looking for ideas on our own as well, so that we may be the ones that everyone else is looking to. So with that, going through what Ryan just went through, or Commissioner Pearson just went through. I agree with everything on there. I mean, I can't argue or, I think there are ways we could approach it when it comes to in-city. The denser the area, we might have more forgiveness on how much requirements there are on parking. And so I think that staggering it or tiering it out from that makes sense. I also think that a carrot approach might help. So as we're offering, as now we have this added layer of need of parking, we might consider saying, hey, if you add a little bit more parking into your project, we will fast track a permit, or there's something we can do to help make this better for you. It's a win for them. It helps us. And I do think, you mentioned a great offsite parking or on-street parking, with UP. I think the, DuPont right down there where you have a more narrow road, you've got on-street parking, great for commercial, great for the residential components there. So there's a lot of examples not far away from us that we can look to. The rolled curb idea, I think, is a good one. That being said, there's holes in it. And I know that you're not you wouldn't disagree. There's some challenges there, but I think the reason I like it is it's just creative solutions to a really complex problem. And we've got to try something. And so I would keep that one on the list, even though, I'd be worried about, silently agreeing that it's okay to drive up onto a curb. There's a pedestrian and bike and all that potential conflict, and what happens when a kid gets hit because someone's parked on there and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that's a solution that, you keep on the table for discussion, and what other creative ideas are out there. I'd be glad to go look at my neighborhood as well, or neighborhoods around me, to look at what the parking demands are and how it's been a challenge. But I do think we're going to come up with a combination on the solution of how this is funded. We've got to request money from everywhere we can get it, and that'll be from everyone who's building too.
Yep.
And the maintenance, I mean, we have to own this. The states put it here. We don't have the flexibility or we don't have the demand for charging money that Seattle does. But there's going to be ways we can put parking in. I mean, Tacoma does it. They charge a nominal amount for parking down there. You pay a couple dollars and you can park for a few hours. So just, slowly the dollars will add up. But we've got to do something more than nothing on that, economic front. So I'm open to continuing the conversation. I mean, I think we need to continue and try and come up with more ideas from other places. And I will go out and start knocking on city doors and stuff like that. What are you doing and how are you solving this, and try and come up with some more ideas.
Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Buer, did you have some
Yeah,
final?
several comments.
Okay.
First of all, to some extent, the market will address this, because if there is not sufficient parking, depending upon the product, developers will provide the parking on site. So that's one piece to this that we shouldn't forget. Two is developing on infill or passed over parcels is really, really hard. And we don't always have the space for some of the things that we put in. So we do provide flexibility, but we are going to have issues with on-street parking in certain specific neighborhoods.
Mhm. Go ahead.
Next piece, I would say this is not a problem now. But it might be in 5 years. And then at that point, someone's going to say, what the heck happened? So yeah, so it's those planners here on the planning commission.
We're going to blame Mr. Buer. So
Yeah. The last thing is, with these types of regulations, you have to have more staff.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Mr. Pearson.
I had one comment on the infill, and this is just some experience that I've had at Pierce County. We have kind of recently gotten into infill lot creation. And one of the biggest things that we did was we took out the road standards. So, and just made it, even though they're creating, say, like on a 2 or 3 acre parcel, they can create like 20 units and 20 individual lots. It has to still go through a formal plat, but it doesn't have to meet the road standards. So it's just emergency vehicle access, which then you don't have to have sidewalks on both sides. You don't have to have, it's a super narrow section. And so you can really get a lot of density when you take out, the road standards, a 45-foot cul-de-sac, all those things. So we've had a couple of pretty nice projects that have resulted in some, affordable housing. I think that they were targeted for like the low 300s or something on those. So that was a pretty good product, I thought, on an infill lot that, was a 2 acre lot.
Mr. Buer.
Habitat for Humanity does that frequently in Tacoma, and also in Lakewood. They're doing a 9-lot subdivision in the Tillicum community and using private roads. That was the only way that they were able to make it work. So I would agree with what Commissioner, what's his name? I can't think of it.
Pearson today.
Is saying,
Yeah.
but it's a private road.
Yeah. Great. Any other further questions, Mr. Larson?
I don't really have a question, but I would just like to say that I concur with Mr. Pearson and others that we need it. It's going to be neighborhood by neighborhood. And we got a darn good start, and we got to look
Yep.
at money everywhere we can.
Great, thank you.
One final
Yes, go ahead,
comment.
Mr.
So, one of the biggest issues with on-street parking is, when you're designing it, you have to account for sight distance. And so, that's why on a few of the projects that we've just allowed for a wider road section for, we're not designing for on-street parking. We're kind of just accommodating for, people that may be parking on a road. And so that's how we've kind of been able to get around some of the constraints, I guess, because otherwise you're not gonna have parking within, like 150 feet of a corner, it's just, so it chews up all of your area. And if your street's only a couple hundred feet long in the first place, you're not gonna have any.
Good. Well, thank you for the discussion, comments. If you do have any additional information, by all means, you can pass it on to staff. They will be happy to oblige and take your comments, suggestions, and donations. No, funding to that road projects. So any other staff reports? I see Mr. Boki isn't on, I don't think. Nope, I don't see him. Yes, Mr. Buer.
Just a reminder, to this commission, we'll have 4 openings on the planning
Yeah.
commission coming up in 2024. So that presents some continuity questions
Yes.
that I think the council will want to take a look at when they start appointing people. Because while
Yes.
we're having this rich discussion this evening, we're going to have to probably have it again or a couple of times.
Yes, you sure will. And yeah, well, I've been putting that out, and I do mention that there is probably a couple of individuals that had some interest, and I think that they might have turned in an application or two. So yeah, that will be on the agenda for the next regime of commissioners. Okay, staff, we have any other?
No, Mr. Chair, that's
So our
it.
next meeting is the 15th,
Correct.
correct? Yes, Mr.
I just had a question about so do we have anyone that has on the commission right now that has put their application back in that is up for?
You up?
The
Huh?
city clerk tracks that, so I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I was
You're
just
not
asking the folks here
Yeah.
if they wanted to.
okay, yeah.
Okay.
He's the only one, Mr. Wagaman possibility, or, okay, yeah,
And
just in
then,
case. So
and
it's
then
it's,
how many is there?
so
total?
there's 4, yeah.
Okay.
So myself, I know I'm not upping for 5 years. Mr. Parsons did say that he's not re-upping. And then we have 2 that possibilities, one will or not, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
great. All right, any other further? No questions? Thank you so much. We'll see you on